Hi there, it's Alan, and we are here today to do the commentary for 3A, Module 3A, which is the bastardization of you, primal beginnings. The reason that we start with this particular piece in this way is that the conditionings or the patterns that we all adopt as children are typically the strongest ones, and they can be seen all the way through a lifetime. And we all come in a certain and particular energy combination, if you will. So that's what the original myth is. If you think about what the original myth is, all it says is, hey, the actual combination of energetics, the way that a human being is composed in their energies. Some people are more sensitive, some people are less sensitive. All of those things, more emotional, less emotional, that those will actually yield a perfect story. So in a way, all we're saying is, hey, look, once we render it into a story, the original myth is the perfect outcome and the only perfect outcome for that particular bundle. So it's a little like the idea that all snowflakes are different. Clearly they are. And all human beings are different once they're rendered into a story. And so it's a way to try to get back to that notion. So what happens is that we come in and we don't recognize, first of all, any separation. And once that body-mind is separated from its notion that is not separate, then that set of combinations of energy are conditioned into believing that they are a separate entity with really particular pieces that go with that. And those last a lifetime. If you look at, say, a leadership 360 that you get in the corporate world, that's going to actually include a lot of what I've talked about here. It addresses those primal patternings in order to try to unlock leadership capabilities and presence. If you look at the spiritual journey, if you go to an ashram in India and you get into a primal process, guess what? They're going to talk about the basic primal positions. And so, we did that in this particular presentation, and that's what's been presented to you. Now, of course, I use the three positions that we find in a lot of leadership literature. There are other versions of this, and the same with archetypes, and the same with all of it. So these are just simply utilized. There's nothing like lockdown, or it doesn't mean that if you dreamt up a fourth position that it probably wouldn't appear and be wonderful to utilize. No one is saying that this is the end all and be all, but they're pointers. They're a way to look at how it is that you are who you are and understand the process that brought you here. And then when we retrace it, understand what the story identity that you are, why it continues to want to be what it continues to want to be, and how we can maybe look at the original myth and allow that to have its play, the consciousness that you are, and actually have you stand in the here and now and in that place. And so there are just a lot of ways to get to this. I mean, I talk sometimes about duality versus non-duality. So that's one way to look at it. I talk about the primal positions, the story identity, the true identity. All of these are ways to approach this walking back, this trek back to who you really are, and the reclaiming of that place, and the wisdom path is exactly that. The hero's journey is another way of talking about exactly the same thing. Now, what the mentoring does, and if you look at processes where people go through this, so take a spiritual seeker, and depending on what tradition they're in, they're likely to go sit with a spiritual master or mentor, a master, sage. It's all the same thing. It's just who's being engaged in as an outer piece. I mean, the real guru lives in you. All a mentor does is stand as a mirror to reflect that back in. So the reality ends up being that in a spiritual seeker, they're going to go sit, they're going to listen to this master, they're going to engage with this master. They might even live in a community where the things that happen in the community, it's what I did when I lived in an ashram, were the subject of examination. Every single day, every single thing that one did was part of the awareness. And we talked and reflected to each other about exactly that. So that really is that's the approach for a spiritual seeker. Now think about a leadership person. Well, you put them in a process, and normally they have a mentor. And then the examination of behavior begins. What's that? What's this? And when unconscious behavior or just things are happening, right? Because that's the way they've always happened before, and it's completely driven unconsciously. That's where the mentoring really has a chance to have its rooting. That's where the action is. The action is in the direct mentorship, in the direct engagement of every single day. And so not only am I your mentor, but you're your mentor. And our relationship is intended to establish a way for you to engage with yourself as you go along through this journey. The spiritual MBA, much like your regular MBA, is to get you ready to jump into the journey. Yes, you are going to be, hopefully, more seasoned and certainly ready to do that. That's what the idea of the process is. And so that's why I named it what I named it, because I saw in my corporate experience the place for that little thing. And I said, hey, that's a little like getting ready to do your spiritual journey and needing the primer, as it were, to then step into the journey yourself. Now, it doesn't mean that you may not continue mentorship. That could happen. And in fact, a lot of times it does. And even when there is that moment where it all settles, and we call that the awakening moment, believe it or not, you still may go back and hang around in that world that you likely enjoyed. So if you're from the corporate world, you're probably going to go back there, and you might become someone who delivers exactly these kinds of things into that world. Certainly in my spiritual journey, I went back and sat with my mentor when mentoring wasn't necessary any longer, other than he would give me a bad time, because that's required. That's part of the mentoring process. But that's what that is. So anyway, the bastardization of you, we're going to talk just a little bit about that now. And I started out by talking, as usual, about the I am, or the original myth. I mean, it's kind of the further back you get, and the more we start to talk about consciousness, the less we can say about it, because we're pointing to an actual, lived experience, a sense, and so that's what we're pointing at. We're using a whole bunch of words. So to be able to have memorized and have an incredible grip on the concept that I'm trying to utilize to point to something, it's what we naturally do, because we think we need to have that as knowledge. We're so knowledge driven. We're cooking coconut pies, and we haven't learned that you put a banana in to make it a banana pie. You got to change something. Well, the changing of that something is what puts you on the wisdom path. And so don't get frustrated when you can't get to the bottom of these concepts. I, to this day, sit around and refine these concepts, and I have a really happy moment when I come up with something more in depth and a better way to deliver it. But it's still just a play in the world of concepts. That's all that is. And the question is it effective as a pointer? Does it deliver the foot in the ass to the person on the side of the pool, and does it send them into the water? Because if it does that, it's it's the story of water. It's the perfect pointer. No matter how much it delights me, the question is someone in the water? And then what is wet? So So the I am an original myth. You are you because the story identity of you has been constructed in a certain particular way based on the process that the belief that you hold as a separate autonomous individual and it has been shaped. And so that's what we talked about in this particular piece. You come in your first emergence, ready to go. That was the picture here. It's this, so that's who you are first time out. But the bottom line is that it does not include any sets of beliefs or any sets of this is what you need, this particular emergence needs to look like in order to participate in the world that they are then going to be given. So that's just exactly what that is. So that emergence is taken, and it is then initiated and conditioned into the system that it walks into. So if you were at the time of Buddha, you would have walked into a world of India, and you would have walked into a world where people were doing things in order to walk on the spiritual path, and you would have been included in one set of conditionings that would have made you a beautiful Indian at 500 BC. If you are an American or a European or an Asian who was born in 19 whatever, or even in the early 2000s, let's say, then you're going to have walked into a world that's entirely different. And you are going to be conditioned to operate and exist in that particular world. That's how that works. So the spiritual journey, remember, is walking yourself back to those early and original moments as an adult, and to stand in what was your natural self and gift in the early moments that you were then conditioned away from. And that's what the hero's journey is. You might even ask yourself, gee, why does it happen that way? And I would give you I've got the answer to that. I don't know. I've never been, it's kind of a silly question. It's the why do things happen the way they happen question, when we know that consciousness just simply appears and does what it does. So an activity within consciousness is exactly that, and the world of duality tries to establish a whole bunch of why does it happen the way it happens. And it is clear that one is born into society the way that they're born into society, and then they are conditioned to play a role, and that conditioning is responded to. So that was what the whole point of this piece is just to give you the terrain, if you will, the understanding of, hey, this is another version of what it is to be on the spiritual journey. Okay, so the first thing I said is, hey, we're going to just talk about the concepts of conditionings. You know these pretty well. First of all, we have to take that child that doesn't know it's separate, and we have to establish that it's separate. That child needs to know it's a separate entity, and so it's in essence conditioned away from that sense of non-separation into a sense of separation, and in fact is taught that that's the only sense that there is. Someone's malaise or they're feeling trapped or in bondage comes from the fact that there is a belief in a story identity as the only identity, and that's the only place that anything happens is in the concept of separation. After a while, your intuition starts to go, hello, friend. Down here at the bottom, where those definitions don't play, I can ping and say, you're miserable inside, brother, because this really isn't what's going on. So that's the play that happens inside. So the first thing we do is we establish a separate self, and as if that's what we were. Remember, we talked about multiply by zero. I'm going to get there in a minute. We don't really know who we are, but we certainly act as if we do. And that pretending is what leads to the life that becomes, for a lot of us, something that is untenable. We simply can't live inside of it because it's not life. It excludes the most vibrant portion of who we are. And when we've acquired enough knowledge and we've gotten to that place, then boom, we become seekers because we can't help it, right? You didn't create that that feeling of dissatisfaction or unhappiness or stuckness. It came from the inside. So now we got to go try to find where is that particular sense of things. So the first thing is we have to teach you you're a separate self, and then we have to teach you that you're the author of your own journey, because otherwise we can't actually maneuver you, manipulate you, mold you, facilitate you into being all the things that we think that you should be. And so those messages are always on their way in, right? Woulds, coulds, and shoulds. Your defenses against the woulds, coulds, and shoulds, all of that starts to become in play, and that's the journey that you took. You didn't know it at the time. You were just from a gut level responding. So the insecurity that comes with separateness, that's just what it is. When one is no longer in the prior unity that is their actual birthright, and they stand outside of consciousness moving presence through them as just simply an ornament on the tree. And if you remember, Joseph Campbell talked a lot about that. The action really isn't on the outside. Where is it? It's in this other level called consciousness, where everything is just what it is. And the journey is the activity, not the outcome of the journey. And all the things that we talk about are all pointers to reclaim that particular birthright. So being the author of your own journey, you can see that really is a confining kind of an idea, because if that's not the case, then all of the stuff that makes it not the case is eliminated by giving someone a definition that says this is you're responsible for this, whether you are or not. You're responsible for this. Okay, and we don't talk about how could it be that you're responsible for things you can't be responsible for. In other words, how could it be if you're built a certain way, and the only answer and response that from the energetics that live inside the body mind is X, and we tell you that you could have had Y? Well, that's wrong, right? Can't be. But we believe it anyway. And so we might live a life of incredible guilt and shame because we've never been able to make that one thing happen that we were told could happen. And that may live in our primal identity as a child. I mean, because very, very deep and monumental and earth-shattering beliefs are loaded onto children in the very beginning. And of course, they're incredibly malleable, and they can adopt any kind of a belief system. And they do. So that you're the author of your own journey is one of the main ones. And then, in addition to being separate and the author of your own journey, the main ways that we move people is through the woulds, coulds, and shoulds. And that's what I went through. I wish you would. This is what you could have done, and this is what you should do. And so those are all expressions of how it is that what you should do is shaped and formed so that you hold that inside yourself. That's your story identity. It may not relate or have anything to do with your original myth identity. In fact, that betrayal is probably underfoot for most of your life. But you're so excited about the knowledge that you're gaining in the world that you're moving into that, your attention is distracted. And so a lot of times you don't feel those things until you've arrived in the world of knowledge to a place where you're going, this keeps happening over and over again, and I can feel the misery and stuckness inside. So that's normally the path that we follow. And I told you, some people, they never ask the question. It's just not in them, and that's fine. That's how this all works. It's not a we can talk about that a lot of times in my question and answer times, which are twice a month. People will ask me about why is it that happens, or the evolution of humanity. All of those questions will be in there, and they're all incredible questions to respond to. Because all you're doing is taking the world of knowledge, and you're taking the intellectual formation of questions themselves, and you're pointing them to a world where there are no questions. How could there be a question when there's no separation? So, but nonetheless, they're really good questions because it allows you to see the assumptions that we make, that somehow humanity is important enough that all of nature and the universe would pay attention to what some bozo named Alan Shelton might want to have happen, or, put your name in the blank if you'd like to. So the woulds, the coulds, and the shoulds. And then we talked about the three, and I used three basic survival patternings, and that is the autocrat, the one that stands on stage and attracts all the attention. Because if you can attract all the attention, what that does is it takes the harm possibility, the survival gets enhanced because you are controlling the attention, and you're dancing and singing and telling jokes, and that is a way to keep everybody engaged so that they aren't doing things that threaten your survival. So, and I told the story about my father. And a way to avoid a severe beating was to be really, really adept at that. If you could tell a story, whatever. So people who are around me, they marvel at the fact I can take anything, anytime, and create a story. And they think that's really this amazing quality. Like, holy cow, what an amazing quality that happens to be. Did you see the sun just came out? And, I guess so. But, for me, it's not an amazing quality. What that is am I going to survive? And I've turned it into an amazing creative outcome. It really is amazing to help folks see what they need to see in the spiritual journey and then the developmental journey in the corporate world where I worked for years. But let me tell you, it's not something that was fanciful or wonderful. It was a way for me not to get hit, So you can imagine, I got pretty good at it, and the more entertaining I could be, and I became a story machine. I couldn't dance and I couldn't sing, but man, I could tell a story and tell a joke, and so that became my main when I'm clearly an autocrat. I want to grab everybody's attention, and I want that attention to keep me safe. Now, in my later life, I can see I don't need to keep, as an adult, safety isn't as big of an issue, but that's a wonderful, wonderful thing that came out of that primal stance. Then I move on. It was funny, my brother, who's 4 years younger than me, because I kind of took all of the attention, he could actually become a complier. So he could go to the movie, order a seat, sit in the seat, make not a lot of noise, follow all the rules, and you know what? His name's Ray. We used to call him Righteous Ray. And Ray was clearly a complier, right? So you had the autocrat, and then the next kid became a complier because that layering was perfect. A lot of older children, by the way, I was the oldest, are autocrats. And a lot of the kids in between are compliers. And then every now and then you run into the third one who's a critic. And what they do is they engage people, and they have those people in that engagement. They're engaged rather than a possibility of doing them harm. So I get stopped for a ticket for speeding, and the policeman comes up to the window, and I start to perform. I basically want him to engage with me on a personal level. I used to go to the IRS when I was a CPA in my early years, and I had a stunning record of never losing an audit. I went into there and I became personal friends with everybody and told them stories, and they all loved me. I taught advanced accounting at the local university. A lot of those people had taken classes from me. And so I used all of that in order to, get what I needed to get done when it came to the work that I did. And if you look at your life, you're going to find that whatever your basic stance is, you likely have used exactly that to get what you need to get done. The only problem is, it's like hitting one key on the piano and not having everything available to you. And there's a high likelihood that your original myth story and who you really are includes a lot more than just the piece that you gravitated to stay safe in the separation and conditioning process as a child. So that's why the reclaiming. It's the turning a one-man band into a symphony. That's actually what the spiritual journey is, and the pain that a one-man band feels is knowing that there's a symphony in there, and yet being able to only play the one instrument that a one-man band, or however that band is formed, whatever that output is, but it's not symphonic. So there you go. There are those three pieces. And so in the end, do we really know who we are? Right? It always gets back to that. in the end of the spiritual journey, and when the hero comes back to the place where he or she is and begins to participate in society, their way of living actually is different than it was before, because there isn't a concern any longer for what the story is. There just simply is a response to what is, and a understanding of how the flow of who they are is going to fit in there, where the true identity is going to actually place the story identity in any particular time. But that placement is absolutely free flowing, and it absolutely places you where it needs to be or wants to be. And that's where the sense of pure authenticity arises, because one is never in any other place than exactly where they need to be. Now, people ask me, is there a payoff to that? I mean, are you going to be richer or more famous or whatever the hell it is that, the separate self wants to know? Well, if that's really what the perfect or the true identity wants, and that's really what the path is going to be. The hero follows the path that's the perfect path for their energetics. Then yeah, for me it ended up that way. I went off to India for a whole variety of years. I was there for 3 solid years in the beginning, and most of every year for the next 4 years after that. So there was about a 7-year piece in there. Now, in the last 4 years, even in the first 3, I would come back and continue to participate, though, much more minor. But then I came back and I became a full-time corporate guy, and I practiced in the leadership development world and wrote curriculum for some of the largest brands that we know on the planet. How I survived in those environments, no earthly idea, other than there was a real clear understanding that once people started to onboard the spiritual journey, if you will, and we called it the developmental journey, it was leadership development, that things changed in their world, and that they changed in a way that the companies could appreciate. They got leaders that were much more developed, that could make decisions in ways that were much better than they had been before. So, and they were authentic. So that's what happened in my life. And so I don't know. I've had people I've worked with, and they've gone off and become musicians and poets, and never looked back, because that was what they were. And others who became CEOs of wonderful companies or whatever. I've had people who were healers, and now they're weeding their gardens and being one with nature. It breaks however it breaks. And so, but I can guarantee you this: there never will be a moment that living in the perfect and true identity that you are, the second guessing goes away, the insecurity goes away. It's just not present any longer. So in that case, you kind of have to say, who cares? It's only when someone else wants a particular outcome. So your story identity comes into these processes a lot of times saying, I want to be more successful. Can't guarantee that. And in fact, probably has a 50-50 chance of happening, because what's going to happen is what's going to happen. Alan and other Allens in the world don't really have the capability of shifting the energetics of who you are, the package that you came into this world as an original myth. All we can do is walk back and see what wants to happen. Remember the what wants to happen? Well, I'm on the same wave that you are as an individual, and the what wants to happen is the what wants to happen. And so as we go along, understand that what can be delivered is really truly what the motivation is inside the misery or bondage or trappedness or whatever you feel that's initiated your spiritual journey. Well, the response to that is to complete the life journey of who you are in its original myth and pure consciousness way. Once that's there, I have yet to meet anybody who says, "Gee, I want it different," because that's the story identity that actually you've learned from these things to say, "Oh, this is what I want, and if I can get that, then," and that drops away. There's never a moment like that. I often say, "Hey, you know how I go into businesses? Well, you see how I am," and I don't fit so well a lot of times. And so they nickname me the Columbo, because I don't look like I belong anywhere, but they always want me in the room and working. So, and it took me a while to discover that, because that knowing that I was one of those people that just wasn't elegantly put together, and no matter how many suits and ties you put on me, I always looked like I didn't belong in one. So the bottom line is that my authenticity was actually in simply letting the emergence of the Allen myth be the emergence of the Allen myth, and seeing where it wanted to locate itself. And when it did, it was in the business world. I am a corporate animal. I belong there perfectly, but I also migrated into an entirely different role. I was no longer shaping merger acquisition transactions and in conference rooms where we fought to the death. I was in places where humans were being developed into more powerful, and when I say powerful, I mean presence and consciousness, and more highly developed human beings. And more highly developed human beings were giving the companies a sense that they had better leadership. And as long as that value proposition could be sensed and felt, then there's places for people like Alan in that world, no matter how oddball they look. So do we really know who we are? I didn't. Nobody does. Do I know who I am today? Not really, because all I can tell you is my story identity, if I'm going to put it into words. The reality is, in every moment, the Allen story is just simply lived, and then it's onboarded by somebody else and spouted out as though that were the case. But that's not the case, as you know. That's just an encapsulated piece of what somebody else has seen. So stories themselves are just simply pieces that have been formed. Now we can live them. There is a bridging into consciousness, and there is a filling in the story. We talked about that. But those mysteries, I don't think, can ever be untwined with words. So the spiritual MBA, I always end with the last piece. That's what we're working on. We're working on delivering you back into the world as you knew it, but having transformed and gone through the experience that turns you from a one-man band into a symphony. All right. That's the end of what I have to say for this particular module, and I will see you next time. Bye.